Should the Lib Dems be working more closely with other parties? My next guest thinks they should. Welcome to the Lib Dem podcast. Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem podcast. I'm John Potter, and today we have a very interesting discussion lined up with a new group that's been set up to help cross-party collaboration, and this group is called Liberal Base. And to speak on their behalf is Tom Parkin. How are you doing, Tom?
Hiya, thanks for having me online, John. It's great to speak to you.
So, I mean, we've had a lot of talk, particularly in the general election in 2019, about progressive alliances working together. Now, is that where this is coming from, the Liberal Base group that you've set up?
I think a lot of it has to do with our performance in 2019. I think we, as Liberal Democrats, need to assess where we are. We have 11 MPs. We might not have a general election till 2024. And so this is really saying, look, in between that time, we have to be better at talking to other progressive parties and other alliances. And this is trying to be that kind of neutral, constructive forum where people can approach as individuals and not feel they have to speak with their party identities.
It's interesting because we've obviously, people who follow politics closely know there have been several other groups kind of set up. So things like, particularly during the Brexit negotiations, like Unite to Remain and all the rest of it. So what are you planning? What are Liberal Base planning to do that would be different from these other groups?
So I think a lot of these groups that you mentioned, Unite to Remain, for example, were all set up around the Brexit debate. And I feel as a party, now speaking as a Lib Dem member, the party really needs to find its identity in a post-Brexit UK. What do we stand for? What is the point of our organisation? And I think that's the same for the groups that go alongside the parties. We're not discussing whether to leave or remain anymore. And so I think the organisations have to change as well and to keep up as well. And this is really trying to give people the chance to approach as individuals with their own skill set, not constantly having to think that they're speaking for their party. And I think in the last year, we've seen that the UK politics doesn't need another progressive party. Change UK, in the European elections and later in the general elections, I think we need parties. We need to hit a compromise where we recognise that people's party loyalties are here to stay, and we should actually, in many cases, celebrate people's strong identities, but not make them become barriers to working together. And I think this is sort of that compromise position.
So, what kind of success have you had so far? Because I should point out, you guys are launching on the 30th of April, is that correct?
Yes, it is. That's correct. So within the first 24 hours of asking for volunteers to contribute pieces or contribute ideas or make suggestions for projects we should have, we had well over 100 people contact us from Australia, the United States and the UK. And that's been really, really encouraging. You know, we don't have a lot of money. It's all completely voluntary that we're based on. And so that was really encouraging. And the breadth of ideas as well has been really good to hear. We've got people from the Bloomberg campaign talking about the techniques that they had and giving some examples of ways left-wing parties and campaigns can learn from that. We've got people from Lib Dem women who are brilliantly going to talk to us about how they get more women to be involved in their campaigns. And we've got a whole series of excellent councillors of all parties, trying to say, how can we get more younger people, more single parents, more older people as well, to really consider becoming candidates themselves. Regardless of political party, this is about getting more people involved in the process between elections.
So, and you've just mentioned that between elections. So what happens at the crunch point during elections? Because that's when you can work together quite happily with people, but very rarely do we see parties actually coordinate at the crunch when elections are happening.
Yeah, so Liberal base isn't interested in fielding candidates. That's absolutely not what we're here to do. And I think we recognise that in our democratic process, that the way that we have first past the post at the moment means that candidates are going to stand against each other, sometimes stand aside. I think it depends really what the level of cooperation, level of success is really for Liberal base, and that's on us to try and make a big success of it. But I think it's silly when there's issues like mental health, transport, climate change that affect us all. And whether we're in Labour or the Lib Dems or the Greens, that doesn't matter. And we all need to come together and work out some way forward.
I mean, you've just mentioned Labour as well. So obviously in the 2019 general election, there were electoral alliances between the Greens, Plaid, yes, and the Lib Dems. But obviously the Labour Party constitution says they are not allowed to do that. And how do you also then, so how do you deal with that issue, but how then do you also deal with, say, I have heard plenty of Lib Dems in southern-facing Tory seats saying, you know, we absolutely have to work with Labour. And some of us who are facing Labour in more northern seats know that's virtually impossible because of, you know, just the nature of the battles that we have up here in the north and elsewhere in the country.
Yes, I recognise that. So originally I'm from near Cheltenham, the Tory-facing seat, and I'm a student and activist in Sheffield, Labour-facing seat. So I do recognise the massive challenges there. On the Labour Party's position, I think that's up to them to change. I think the realities are they need to gain 124 seats in order to have a one-seat majority. And I think the reality will hit them quite soon that they have to work with other progressive parties. And this is just trying to get the ball rolling with grassroots activists. And again, I understand that there are difficulties with how the Lib Dems should work with the diverse appeal of seats. We work well in central London. We also work well in massively rural areas as well. So I think there's not just a political spectrum that the Lib Dems work well on, but also on different demographics.
And it kind of sticking with the Lib Dems, just because you're a Lib Dem member, obviously I'm a Lib Dem member. Since the 2019 general election, there's been a kind of what do Lib Dems stand for now that Brexit issue has not entirely sorted. There'll be lots of Brexit issues coming on, but actually the whole Remain versus Leave is done. That's obviously happened. And a lot of Lib Dems saying, okay, what are we going to now fight for? What are we going to stand for? Now, does working with other groups maybe dilute that message that we're going to eventually try and build? Or what's your feeling on that?
I think the Lib Dems have had quite an identity change in the last 10 years, you know, from sort of the Orange Booker types to going to becoming, you know, bollocks to Brexit was our big slogan, to now leaving that. So we are used to having to change our identity as the political realities change. And I don't think we shouldn't apologise for that. That's our role, to make sure we are a relevant and powerful force. But again, part of being a relevant and powerful force is being willing to work with other parties. We've had leaders in the past, quite rightfully, saying that we shouldn't be ashamed that our ambition is to get into government. Now, I think it's unlikely, sadly, that we're going to get a majority Liberal Democrat government at the next election. So we have to have the good working relationships with other parties, whilst saying, you know, we are proud Liberal Democrats, but also the reality, as I keep going back to, the reality is we have 11 MPs, we are in single digits in opinion polls. We now have this amazing period going forward where we don't have elections going on, internal elections or external elections, and we have to make best use of that. On
the national scale, obviously we have a lot of elections going forward, both locally and obviously we have to then caveat as well, the Welsh and Scottish assemblies are both up next year as well. Yeah. One of the things, when you emailed me about Liberal Base, you said about how the cooperation hasn't brought results. You know, there hasn't been results. So, and I'm reading a fantastic book at the moment about people who say they're into politics, but actually don't do any of the sort of activist sort of activities. They think being involved in politics is reading a Twitter feed and watching the news. And I think that's part of the reason sometimes progressives, as well-intentioned as they are, don't actually get the results they sometimes want, is because they're what's been called political hobbyists rather than activists. So how do you expect, and how do you expect to change that from this group? How do you expect to get liberal-minded people, progressive-minded people off the backsides and out campaigning?
Well, I think one of the troubles with the way that we do campaigning, and this is what I mean by when it's just political parties, is if you're not a member of a political party, it's actually quite hard to go and do door knocking and to have the confidence and the support to go and do that kind of thing. As you say, get off your arse and go and do something. And so we're hoping that when we're all freed from these coronavirus lockdowns, to hold some live training events, not for people to stand as candidates. As I said, we're not interested in that, but to give training events to go and listen to people and say, look, what in your local community can we do cross-party to help you? What training events would you like to organise? And this isn't going to political parties, this is going to individuals and charities and local organisations and saying, look, we would like to get off our arse and do something, but we need to come together. We need to have a sort of a pool set of resources. And that's what Liberal Base is trying to do, really.
And can we get anywhere, generally, any sort of progressive parties, without some sort of electoral reform? You know, I mean, Labour hold the key to that, but actually, given that they keep on, I mean, the walloping Labour have just got, hopefully, will focus minds. But without that, it's very difficult because the first past the post punishes people for not choosing one of the two big parties.
Yes, and I think with the Labour Party, they are the biggest beneficiaries of, strangely, of the first past the post system. Their seat numbers are inflated even more than the Conservatives. I think their interest, the fact that they had such a walloping at the last election, means that the gap they are so unlikely to fill between now and 2024. And I think that really does change the dynamics for other progressive parties. I think it says, look, there are many examples of where the Liberal Democrats and Labour work well in local government, supporting executives or even both in opposition working well together. So it's not unprecedented for Labour and the Lib Dems to be working together. Kirsty Williams in Wales is supporting the Labour administration there. So quite why it's seen as being sort of unconventional and bizarre, I don't really understand.
But I think that's the difference between local politics and Westminster politics, is the fact that there's been coalitions and agreements between all parties of all colours for years upon years upon years to work together. But and that's why the coalition in 2010 was such a shock to the system, to so many people. You know, I didn't vote for a coalition kind of thing. You never vote for any. You don't actually even vote for a political party. Our constitution says you vote for an individual.
Exactly, and I think there's a massive problem there when people's perceptions of how the system works and how the system actually works, which we saw with Brexit, we saw with, as you say, the coalition, we saw with all the technical points that Joe raised when he was Speaker. And I think the reality is, keep going back to the reality, is that we have these examples in local elections. The coalition that we were part of shows that it can work at Westminster. We just have to, as progressive forces, have the will and the independence and, frankly, to be brave and go forward and say, look, we can't do this alone. We are interested in doing this together, but it doesn't compromise our identity as Liberal Democrats to do so.
Now, what would you say to those Liberal Democrats who think, by working with others, we're taking our eye off the ball off ourselves? And actually, Lib Dems, again, going back to reality, we are still recovering from the coalition years. And that actually what we need to be is actually focused on our message and how we win more seats.
Well, I think when we say our message, I think that comes from taking action and doing something. I think the role of the Liberal Democrats, unashamedly, should be to be a productive and practical force in government. And that means, in our system, working with other progressive political parties. I think actually part of that cooperation with other parties will help craft our message. The way sort of that question is put suggests that our party forms its message on its own in isolation, and it can't do that. No party can do that. And so I think working with other parties on a grassroots level, at the most local level possible, will help craft those messages and will help the Liberal Democrats appeal to right-leaning seats and left-leaning seats, because it will focus on local issues.
And obviously something that's happening not just on a local level, but obviously nationally and internationally, is coronavirus at the moment, and forcing a kind of a slightly different kind of politics. You know, certainly I've literally just done an interview with Ed Davey about how in opposition we have to work together. Now, is this just showing you that actually when it's required, political parties can swallow sometimes their partisan nature sometimes and actually work together?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is theatre. You know, if we watch House of Commons, you know, it's just a bear pit, and for no real reason. You know, they exit the House of Commons and they all seem to be quite good friends, really, which I think is how politics is in reality. I think what we've seen so far with all the parties working together has been quite promising, frankly. I think the way that we bring more voters into politics is if candidates and politicians treat each other with a bit more respect. Yeah, so I don't think people really turn on to the news to watch a fight, really. I think they've got brothers and sisters and so on that they can, and children that they can hear have a squabble. And I think it makes the profession of politics more professional. I think it makes it more respectable. And I think people elect their MPs to do something and to take action. And that's sort of what we're encouraging here.
It's interesting because just before we go on to your launch and what you guys are hoping to help potential activists with, one of the most frustrating things for me particularly over the Brexit issue was how basically the country and the two main political parties went to extremes. So you had the Tories going extremely right wing, where people like Ken Clarke and Sir Nicholas Soames were kicked out of the party. And then you also had the Labour Party going extremely to the left, where you had, you know, the Laura Pidcock saying, "I have no friends who are Tories," etc., which you've just spelled out is absolute nonsense. If you have no friends from different political persuasions, you are not getting a good balanced argument.
Yes.
And I read a very good book about the Labour rise under Corbyn called Left for Dead, and one of the writers said it was called political sectarianism, where basically not only do you think you are right on the argument, but you think you are morally right and everyone else is morally wrong.
Yes.
And that's something that's got to change. Maybe the coronavirus crisis will help with that, but actually up until the 2019 general election, it was a pretty extreme level of kind of extremeness in politics in Britain.
Yeah. I think you're right, and to sort of that point about Laura Pidcock, I think I would question how well you'd be doing your job as an MP if you decide that you don't have any friends and talk to anyone that's conservative. I think it's about taking the toxicity out of a lot of public debate that's putting a lot of people off. And actually, I think that's one of the reasons why, as you said earlier, that we have a lot of sofa activists, or people that just scroll Twitter and think that that's doing something. Signing a petition is good, is helpful, but that's not all your activism. That's not what I think is your public duty to get involved. And I think this is an effort to do something more. Okay,
so let's talk about your efforts then. Okay, so we've talked about the kind of philosophy of working together. So what's happening at your launch? Let's tell me about your exciting launch on the 30th.
Okay, so on the launch, we've got liberalbase.com is being launched, and we've got over 100 articles going up from people from all over the world about their experiences and what they're doing in their local community. We've got some petitions that people are going to submit, and we'll be reviewing those in the next few days. But petitions will hopefully be going up where people can sit on their sofas and sign, but also some advice on how people can become door knockers and how people can go forward to their local parties. We've got some articles from people experienced in mental health services up and down the country for those that want to know more about the realities on the front line. And we've made sure that we've got contributions from people at all levels of government. We've got former MEPs, MPs, peers, councillors of all parties and none, who are talking about what they do in their day-to-day job. I think there's a lot of confusion about who is responsible for what and what it's like to be a councillor and what it's like to be an MP. And I think it's just providing people with a set of information all in one place about how they can take forward an issue and who to go to.
We talked about helping people become politically active and get involved. What about, I've often found that some of the best people who eventually do become political actually get involved for community reasons first. Is that part of the thinking as well?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of examples where I know I have a lot of friends. I study politics at university, but I have friends that I live with and who say, look, I want to do something, but I don't know all the technical points. I don't know the details. I don't know what I can do. And I think that sort of fear of getting involved is putting people off even local politics and local issues. And particularly now with coronavirus changing all of our lives, it's shown the absolute importance of politics and of central and local government in keeping our lives and our economy going. And so this is just trying to be that space where people can go to and work out what they're almost entitled to do as citizens, and to allow people to connect locally.
And I think an example I can use was when I was on I used to go to Preston for Europe meetings, these pro-Remain meetings. And actually, I've been campaigning for a long time. I enjoy campaigning. I love door knocking and things like that. Actually, most people, that is a world away from their comfort zone and have no idea where to start. And a lot of the people I was talking to, we've talked about people getting off the backside, etc. Well, these people didn't know how to do anything else than just the basic kind of signing a petition, having an argument with someone on Twitter. That isn't going to bring around change, and that isn't going to lead to the results that your group's hoping to achieve.
Yes, and I think as members of the Liberal Democrats and as campaigners and activists, we're used to door knocking. It's what we do throughout the year, and I think it's quite easy to sort of take for granted that people will go door knocking, people will go leafleting, and actually it's quite a big jump for a lot of people to do, to knock on their neighbour's door and ask them to give a leaflet or ask them to vote for someone. And that's and I think that is a bridge that often local parties help to provide. But again, if you're not a member of a political party, you don't have that support network and you don't have that sort of in route to that kind of activism.
And I suppose the things that also have to be, the reason political parties also exist now, which has got more complicated, is actually not just the training side of it, motivation, where to go, but actually it's things like, do you know what you're allowed to do with data? How do you, and particularly with GDPR and things like that, that actually one of the things we had to discuss when we're doing stuff with the pro-Remain groups is actually whose data are you using? Is it Lib Dem data? Is it the Preston for Europe's data? Is it the Labour Party's data? It becomes very complicated.
Yes. So I think Liberal base is quite clear that there's any email addresses or data that we're given, that's not being passed on to any political party. As I say, as a Liberal Democrat activist, I have absolutely no interest in exploiting Liberal base for any kind of Lib Dem gain. That goes against the entire point of the whole platform. It is about trying to create this kind of positive, constructive, almost apolitical space. It's supposed to have its own distinct brand that people can happily be a Liberal-based activist and Labour Party member, or a Liberal-based activist and a Liberal Democrat, or whatever. And I think that's sort of our main message going forward, is that you can be a member of another party or none and be involved in our organisation.
Okay, well, that's it's really interesting. I'm sure if you're listeners or viewers to this, what do you think of it? Do you agree? From a Liberal Democrat point of view, is this something you'd like to see more of, or do you think it's something that might hinder the Lib Dems? Please comment below and let us know. By all means, though, have a word. Go to it's at Liberal Base on Twitter. I'm sure you'd welcome any feedback to the group. And just now, obviously, I want to wish you good luck yourself, because you are standing as a candidate for the Lib Dems
Thank
as
you.
well. So how's the campaign going? How are you getting on with it? And how's life at the moment? Other than stopping for coronavirus, obviously.
Well, I don't know about you, John. I'm getting sort of, I got the election bug. And then you sort of go out and do door knocking and hammer on doors and deliver leaflets. And then it all goes flat. And so we're all a bit on the home straight, really. But now we've got an excellent set of candidates in Sheffield, the great Liberal Democrat team up there. So yes, I'm a candidate in Manor Castle ward for the City Council. So that will now be this time next year, hopefully. So I think the important bit for anyone that is a party activist is keeping up the effort, keeping up the energy to what looks like probably the longest campaign in decades.
Thank you very much, Tom, for coming on. We really appreciate it. All our listeners and viewers out there, if you do want to get in touch with Tom, go to Twitter at Liberal Base. If you want to follow everything to do with the podcast, it's on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Lib Dem Pod. You can follow myself at John Potter LD. We've had loads of podcasts coming up, so about various different groups within the Lib Dems. We've got more interviews with prominent Lib Dems and MPs. So do subscribe to us both on YouTube and on your podcast provider. Do stay safe. We are in the middle of this coronavirus. Look after yourself, and we'll have another episode very soon.